now we're going to go to the another section of our conference, which is going to be questions and answers, blitz questions and answers. And I would like to invite a panel who's going to be featuring the R.I.S.E consortium representatives. I would like to invite Monika Antanaitytė, who is a project manager at the Lithuanian Gay League and Eternity. Please take a seat. Thank you. I would like to invite Kaspars Zalitis. I'm not sure if I need to present you again. Okay, so please. And another guest from Poland, Mr. Hubert Sobecki. I will try to pronounce it, the chairperson of Miłość Nie Wyklucza organization.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Okay, so microphones are working. We are set to speak about R.I.S.E. And the first question I would like to, it goes to Monika, actually. I would like to ask Monika. What are the most difficult aspects of the project?
Well, I could go on and on how it was so difficult to work in the pandemic situation, but that is, a common issue probably to all sectors, right? But the most difficult issue for us, I would say, is the political sensitivity of our project. Our project is very politically vulnerable, and that really reflected on its implementation on many, many levels. For example, we constantly had to counter the negative and dominating political narrative here in Lithuania, and I think in other partner countries as well, which, contributed very negatively on a variety of our aspects of the project. Also, the problem is as well the high level of this political narrative and the way it negatively contributes, and I'm not talking only about the negative contribution to rainbow families or other families, but also to our constitutional institution, to our very basics of democracy as separation of powers as well. So I think Polish partners also had similar issues in terms of very domineering political narrative.
But before going to Polish partners, we'll go to Latvia first. And I would like to ask Kaspars, the partnership law is coming to a very active phase in Lithuania on the political agenda, and not only political agenda. What is the situation in Latvia at the moment in this respect?
So it is interesting in all the meanings of the word, but just to start the conversation about the partnership regulation in Latvia starts in 1999, so when the first partnership law was drafted in Latvia. So, and it's been 7 attempts already to submit one or other regulation in Latvia to adopt a regulation that would protect it, at least given a minimum protection for the same-sex families or the other families that are not just simply married. But we do have 2 historic constitutional court decisions which are due to implement. The Constitutional Court has stated a deadline when the judgments need to be implemented, and that's June 1st, 2022, which we are skeptical the country will be able to do, but we are actively working in drafting the regulations, all the possible regulations, the implementation of the Constitutional Court judgment. So it is. We were more hopeful in 2018 once the Ombudsman made a decision and stating stating that the same-sex families are also families and protected by the Constitution. Nevertheless, the Constitution is stating that marriage is a union between man and a woman, but now even the Constitutional Court has said in 2 judgments that same-sex families are families. So the only thing is that some of our politicians, or at the moment the majority of the politicians, are still not understanding Latvian when it says that then a couple of the one of the most important bodies when it's is stating that. So we are hopeful. The country needs to, the deadline is there, so we'll see if the constitutional crisis is going to happen when we do not follow the concept of rule of law.
And in comparison, let's say, to Lithuania and Latvia, where do you think we kind of stand, both of us, and who's more advanced where, and if it's possible to compare?
Better?
It's not a matter of competition.
It is not a matter of
course
competition, but often we are Baltic rivals. But I have to say,
Brothers, rivals.
Yeah, we are the Baltic rivals. It's like, it's not even, it's not saying who is better or worse, because Estonia again is better, because there is a partnership regulation already a long time ago. But it's, I think it's a matter of rights, and sometimes we're a bit further on, and then Lithuania is further on. But one thing is, when it comes to a legal situation of LGBT rights, then there is a competition between Poland, because for many years, for already 6 years in a row, Latvia was proudly the last place in the European Union for the LGBT rights. So for 2 years in a row, Poland is stealing us, being the worst in an LGBT rights situation in the European Union. So that when it's then when we talk about the situation.
Okay, so since Poland was mentioned, so we'll go to you, Hubert. And we heard about the cases of LGBT free zone areas, and from what I understand, even after the last week's decision of a free cities or counties to demolish that leave that zones, it's still about 16 or something % of Poland is.
Honestly, I've lost counts.
It's still quite. So where is it? What is happening, if I may ask? And this abandoning of LGBT free zones in those former LGBT zones, does it change anything for LGBTIQ plus people? Is it any changes at all?
Yeah. You need to understand 2 things. First of all, the one thing which was already mentioned by Professor Urbanik, which is a very unfortunate circumstance, but also something that we need to be painfully aware of during our advocacy work on human rights, or something that's very idealistic and something that tends to associate it with lofty goals of humanity at large. What really worked was really money, was the fear of those local governments losing funding, EU funding. That was really the only kind of rationale which, in their minds, was strong enough for them to take a different approach to the topic. Now, the question whether the so-called LGBT plus or LGBTI ideology, free zones, whether really they change anything in the life of people living in those regions, in those areas. Yes and no. Well, first of all, on the very human level, you can simply imagine being a person belonging to any group of people which is already ostracized and which is already discriminated against, and which has already been demonized and dehumanized in the public media and the state-owned media, which you maintain by paying taxes. You were called a child molester for the past 24 months because somebody needed to win an election, and eventually they did. And after all this time, and after another person and another person, very, very high up people, all public servants and clerks, people paid again their salaries from your taxes. They come and go, and they build up the momentum of this incredible hateful propaganda over time. And then you see them really profiteering politically on the local level by introducing those smaller versions of the same kind of propaganda only issued by official documents, official resolutions of municipalities and voivodeship, which is regions, councils, then I cannot really answer this question, how do you feel about that? That's the question for this this terrible, live show about interesting people which runs on television on midday. That's probably the kind of question that you ask, and you will probably get the same kind of answer which you usually see during those midday shows. But when it comes to the legal situation, well, of course, these resolutions are not binding. So they are soft law, so to speak, but they do create a chilling effect. They do create a chilling effect which goes from all the way up on the central level of the government to the local governments, and then via those governments to the local clerks. If you do have LGBT plus people living in those regions who want to do anything at all openly as LGBT plus people, the clerks already, in this non-binding resolution, they do have a very strong motivation to say no to them. For example, if they want to, I don't know, organize anything, a meeting with an interesting person to speak about LGBT plus people on a personal and human level. They want to invite people from the town. Perhaps they won't be able to use the community center anymore because in the resolution it clearly states that family must be protected against external ideological attacks, and perhaps this already states such an attack. So again, it's complex. It's in the end, it's a terrible thing. It's a shameful thing that it really happened, and I'm very happy that those things were eventually rejected, and I'm also bitterly satisfied by the fact that what really worked in the end was the basest of reasons that turned out to be effective for those people, for which the basest of reasons were the initial motivation to do those zones in the first place. So that's a bit ironic, I would say.
Thank you so much. And I would like to remind you that the questions, the floor for questions is open. If you have anything to ask the speakers of the panel, please shoot. But meanwhile, I would like to go back to Poland also. And you mentioned one of the biggest motivational factors to abandon those zones is the European Union money. What else the European Union, do you think, could do in order to encourage that transformation in Poland?
I hope that you will have a chance in a moment, and if not, then later on online, to see just several videos which we prepared by storytelling videos about our rainbow families. For the first time ever, we've been around for dozen of years, as an active LGBT plus organization in Poland. We are always very community-based, very close to the community. We are trying to make a similar campaign to show the stories, to tell the stories of rainbow families living in Poland for years. They were too afraid. Ironically, what really happened is because of all this hate, it's hate, basically, they decided that they're fed up with it. And perhaps they're going to leave the country, perhaps they're going to emigrate eventually to find a better life in a different EU country. But they can't really stand and do nothing anymore. And in the end, we got 5 fantastic stories from people from smaller towns and villages and big towns and whatnot. And what the EU could help us with is make more of those videos, really, honestly. That's the first step that must be done. People need to hear those stories, because if you see middle-aged ladies and men from those small villages who are actually accepting grandparents to the children of their children, even though their daughter is in a same-sex relationship. And if you look at their faces, they don't look like those people on Netflix series. They look like ordinary Eastern European people from small villages. And yet, somehow in their hearts and minds, they find the space and energy to be accepting and loving. And it really doesn't take that much. And I'm absolutely certain that if people do see those films enough, something will change in their minds. I mean, you have to be a monster not to feel something while watching it. So the first thing, we could use lots of help with doing lots of flooding Europe with those videos. I would do that, really. And honestly, the next thing, Poland needs to be called out. I mean, you need to call out hate. You can't really put it under the carpet. You can't really talk about, well, perhaps it has to do with Eastern European specificity. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. I mean, we actually tried to introduce civil unions 9 times, so we're better. We failed We failed 9 times, not just 7. But we started later, because we started in 2001. So maybe that means you're better. But still, we gained absolutely nothing, even though the polls show that acceptance is rising steadily. And right now we have more than 50% of people in Poland being absolutely okay with at least civil unions. And it doesn't change anything, because the government is still using like the most disgusting, absolutely horrifying propaganda to say that this will actually destroy Polish families, whatever that is. So call them out, because at some point they're simply going against Polish people.
If I can just add on the European Union, because time by time, even we have commissioners that are very supportive towards the LGBT cause, but this is what I would like to call out commission. It's to follow. It's to follow the fundamental values of the European Union, because if we are and my full respect to Commissioner Dalli and to Commissioner Jourova, but I think it should be an active stand on this, because if European Commission and the Council is not going to do anything on Poland and on Hungary, there are more and more countries to follow. We see that the Latvia is on the way. It's like we do fancy what happens in these 2 countries. Maybe not all of the governments. We see what Slovenia is doing. We see what Slovakia is doing. We see what Romania is doing. So it's like, it's not anymore 2 countries in the European Union that are going backwards, but there are more and more. And if the European Commission and the countries will not have a clear stand and not going to say what are the fundamental values of the European Union, then we will have a very strange, to say it sharp, situation in the European Union when there are hate which are resonating with some of the expressions we had, let's say, before and during the Second World War.
Thank you. I see hands are rising, and Jean-Luc. So Jean-Luc will.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Jean-Luc V from the Proud at Work Foundation in Germany, and there's one question I would like to ask you, because you speak about money, which is a great leverage, and you spoke about government, the European Union. What is for you the roles of corporations, especially from global corporations? How could they be helpful? Because I'm rather sure we could, if I may speak in our names, or their names. What is your expectations also to global corporations in helping you in achieving your goals?
Thank you. The question to a particular person? 2 or 3 of them?
Whoever wants.
Well, Baltic Pride in 2022 in Vilnius is coming up. So we, of course, accept any propositions of cooperation. So raising awareness is extremely important in all of our countries' situation, because, for example, as a lawyer, sometimes I am completely at loss how little legal tools I have to help the families, but social responsibility, it actually extends beyond the legal minimum. So, of course, where raising awareness comes in place and where it would be absolutely necessary.
It's when it comes, like I'm quite sharp always about this, but I think When the global corporations think about the further investment, I think it's like they have to choose where to invest. It's like this is what we do in Latvia as well. We are researching the true cost of intolerance. It's like, do not invest in the countries, even if it's in the European Union, do not invest in countries, or send a message before investing in any of the countries that they're not going to do this when it's hateful, because it's not good for their employees. For those countries where are these organizations and global organizations, if you are able, talk to the government, talk to your institutions, and make sure make sure your opinion is heard, because we see it's like there is a country over here that's behind the biggest fear of the banking industry, which is AML. But there is an ESG coming up for financial institutions, which are going to impact what is happening. It's and not only the corporation, speak it out loud. And for those organizations, like we have a sort of a startup for many years, and they're opening now a factory in Poland, and we are speaking about that the progress flag is going to fly permanently at the outside of the factory. So making sure there is a statement, because the progress flag is flying at the main Riga office. So these are some of the things that you could do, is make a statement. And most important, if there is no protection for the same-sex families within the countries, make the protections within the companies, because you are able to do this. We see that the companies are able to do this. It obviously costs you more, but it's the business case for diversity. You also gain out of that.
Hubert?
Yeah, basically, I mean, CSR is not enough. And giving some nice amount of money to Pride marches, that's all very nice, and I'm sure it's a huge help for those marches and those events. But in the end, from our perspective, we're not a march organizing organization, right? So but we are an advocacy and community building one. So it means for us that, for example, for the past 2 years, again, because of all this propaganda, we had dozens of companies suddenly realizing, usually it's the global who asks the questions for the branch, for the local branch, are your people safe? Actually, several months ago, we ran a huge workshop, a month-long workshop for a large Swedish company, because the Swedish Central, Swedish HQ, they were terrified that the employees are not safe in Poland. And they were also terrified that perhaps people will begin having mental health issues because of this atmosphere. And they're right, people do have those issues. But what I'm aiming at is, yes, of course, you can do a lot with internal policies and diversity and inclusion management. It's all open. And I'm very happy to say that there's an increasing number of usually international companies and corporate bodies which do realize that they can implement those on the Polish turf, and they do. And that's the first thing you should do. You should have all those internal policies, all those equity enforcing policies in place. Secondly, you really do have a lobbying impact as an investor, just as Kaspar has said, and not only on the PR level, but also on the direct advocacy level, which is lobbying, basically. So there are international bodies which take care of international PR lobbying, such as We Are Open Foundation, for example, and Open for Business Foundation. And they do issue some reports which are very good tools for advocacy and lobbying on the central government level. There's actually one concerning Central Eastern Europe, which has just been issued 2 months ago, I think, which already did give some solid numbers when it comes to the expenses of discrimination. And they basically showed a very nice pie chart showing how much of this huge lump of money you lose because you are being homophobic. And that's a very good picture to show to some of the politicians. So perhaps you should try doing that.
But if I can just add, is like there is, especially on they're open for business report on the Poland, and this is, I think we're trying to do the same in Latvia. For example, you're losing the 2% of the GDP, and this is how we cannot increase salaries for the teachers. That we cannot provide support for the oncology. It's like that's why people are dying from cancer, and this is just from your policies. And this suddenly politicians won't hear it, but the people will suddenly hear it because my relatives are dying because you have a hateful policies and so on. And the last thing is like good thing that you said about the lobbying, because we know the big industries do have a lobbying investment, and when and let's do it kind of together. It's like, you know, the NGOs are not as crazy as we look sometimes. You know, we know how to cooperate with business.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, because we're also going to have a panel actually discussion about this theme. But Mariano, your question also.
Yeah, well, actually, you read my mind. I was going to you go straight to the topic on what is the cooperation that you guys are seeking from the corporate investment. My name is Mariano. I represent Moody's in Lithuania, and when I speak about Moody's globally in general. So when we're talking around LGBTQ rights, it is a global policy. It is a policy that is implemented in Lithuania. I have spoken to Vladimir in a number of occasions, and I keep telling him, for us, giving you money for the Baltic Pride next year is the easiest part. Will that change anything? No. Will I be marching? Yes. Will my people be marching? Yes. Will that make a change? Very little, because it's 1 month a year. It's 1 day in the march. It's a few hours. We do have policies in place for diversity incentives, diversity benefits. We do have a continuous education program inside the organization, and including Lithuania. The LGL has spoken in Moody's Lithuania, and all that is very helpful. But you touch upon a very critical point, money, you know, taxes. You said it yourself. We have employees who are LGBT persons around the globe, not only Lithuania, around the globe. You guys are paying taxes for governments that tend to, you know, not move as progressive as you would like them to be. We in the private sector, we generate the money for those taxes. Without the private sector, the state doesn't exist in reality. So we are funding those campaigns. So how can we get closer together to make an impactful, progressive change towards a modern society? You answer most of it, though. Thank you.
Yeah, just from the top of my head, I mean, because you should definitely speak together on the topic, how to cooperate. But there is a very nice piece of practice that I guess it can be used in campaigning, and it can be used on advocacy on different stages of this advocacy process. Usually it's used when things are almost said and done. It's a pledge system. You pledge support to a cause. It can mean many, many different things. For example, in the state during the marriage equality battle, they did have townships, mayors, clerks and public servants and officials, but also corporate bodies, entire corporations, just very well-known CEOs pledging their support for the cause. Sometimes it just means saying, yes, I'm for it. Sometimes it means, yes, and I will fund the campaign for the cause. Usually it's done with the so-called sense of urgency kind of campaigning, which means that you begin it 3 months in advance before a very important vote, for example. But sometimes you can do it also on a continuous, so-called always-on campaigning level, which means that there's really no telling when you're going to achieve your goal, but you begin anyways. So it means you can create a platform, call it, for example, Companies for Equality, and create a charter and ask different companies from the country to sign this charter, saying, yes, we are for equality. What does it mean exactly? 10 points. First of all, rainbow families. Second of all, universal benefits. Third of all, taking care of discrimination, I don't know, crime, hate, regulations, whatever you come up with. So cooperate with your NGOs and cooperate with your social partners, come up with that, and create this sort of, it's a campaigning platform only, but you can do many things with it. And from this campaign, you can also address politicians. And from this campaign, you can also use it as this sort of jump-starting place from which you sort of attack politicians with your communication, saying that we are for these values, these are our 10 points. Our business is going to be much, much better in this country with those 10 points, and we are all for it, and you should make the change. So, yeah. I just created a campaign for you.
Yeah.
Only $10. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there is a lot of like in Lithuania and Latvia, and I think in Poland as well. There is a diversity charters which you can join and be out and loud about these issues. It's like, for example, I think it's important as well to support it loudly, but as well to work it inside. It's like, for example, one of the biggest supporters of the MOZAIKA is the Swedbank, which is the largest bank in Baltics, and they just didn't support the Pride, which is the most important thing. It's like they were working together inside the organization on explaining their employees why they're doing. It's not just a fancy thing. It's like we're just doing a nice thing. They did a massive work inside explaining why it is important. They were supporting their employees who are LGBT. They were encouraging, if you want to come out, you can come out. It's safe. If you don't, stay in a closet, but ask for the support. It's like here the support people. Like, you know, it's like we. These are the instruments. There are foreign investment councils as well, like at least in Latvia, there are annually foreign investment council meeting with a president and with a prime minister. Point this out. It's like you're pointing out that as a corruption is one of the issues in our country. Point that out, that intolerance is. Here are the embassy people, the diplomatic missions. Point that constantly out. It's like these are the problems. So make sure that they're listening, and these are the taxes. Exactly. It's like money counts in the beginning. And this is not, we're not talking, it's like there was a discussion about, for example, Kill the Gays law in Uganda, which sometimes we talk about cutting the development aid. Cutting development aid is cutting food for the poorest. We are the first, like, even we think sometimes we're third countries. No, we're the first countries in the world. Now it's a question about the taxes, and say it's like, you know, we can find an investment somewhere else as well, and be sharp. And you can be sharp. We've seen it in other situations. You know, it's like we've seen it, so you can as well be quite sharp on this field.
Thank you. And Monika, do you have anything to add?
Just to quickly add, why sending message simply works. Hubert told you about the stories, the storytelling videos in Poland, and our Polish partner indeed managed to find these families who are open and ready to talk. But in other countries, and this includes our countries, it was really quite a challenge to find families who are open. So standing with rainbow families, it creates a safe space, it creates visibility for them, and it creates a platform for them to tell their message.
Thank you so much. I have to close this very interesting panel. A round of applause to the panel.